Hey guys, welcome back to Lifting Linux, the channel where we put Linux systems to the test. Today I've got something a little special. This is the DreamQuest Pro Plus, a mini PC that comes pre-installed and fully configured with a Linux operating system. That alone makes it worth a look, but what makes this device even more interesting is that you and I had a hand in its development. 6 months ago, DreamQuest sent me an early prototype of this mini PC and asked for your input on building a Linux-focused system. If you missed that first video, I re-uploaded it here on Lifting Linux last week. Definitely check it out for the full backstory. I'll wait. Today, we're going to take a look at what, if any, of our suggestions made it into the final product. I'll walk you through the hardware changes, test out the updated specs, and most importantly, dive into the bold direction DreamQuest took with the operating system. It's a choice that I think is both perfect for this mini PC and also highly controversial. Let's dive in. Now, as I get into the price and specs of this mini PC, it'll quickly become clear who this device is really aimed at. But just to frame this review from the outset, I'm looking at this entry-level mini PC from the perspective of a new, novice, or Linux curious user. This review isn't for seasoned system admins or power users with decades of Linux experience. Seasoned Linux users will likely pass on this just based on the specs and capabilities alone. That said, I do have nearly 30 years of Linux experience, and I'll be using that to make an educated guess. Is this a good machine for someone who wants to explore Linux without needing to build a system, configure it from scratch, or even figure out which distro to install? Can the DreamQuest Mini PC offer a smooth, affordable entry point into Linux and open source software? That's the question I'm looking to answer, plain and simple. Unboxing the DreamQuest Pro Plus, everything looks pretty much the same as the version I reviewed 6 months ago. Same packaging, same mini PC inside, along with a 30-watt DC wall wart, HDMI cable, and VESA mounting hardware. But the real headline is the CPU upgrade. DreamQuest replaced the Intel N100 with the newer Intel N150. Both are 4-core, 4-thread Alder Lake N chips with a 6-watt TDP, but the N150 raised the ceiling. It has a max turbo frequency of 3.6 gigahertz versus 3.4 on the N100, and a 24 EU Intel UHD XE GPU that boosts up to 1 gigahertz, a leap from the N100 750 megahertz GPU. Inside the PC, we've still got a 512 gigabyte SATA M.2 boot drive, plus room for a second NVMe only M.2 SSD, and even a 2.5-inch SATA bay. The machine comes with 16 gigabytes of socketed DDR4 3200 RAM, upgradable to 32 gigabytes. The Realtek Wi-Fi module remains, now upgraded to Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 combo. It's the RTL 8851BE. This chip enjoys better Linux support than its predecessor, but I'll cover what quirks remain in the OS section. In response to community feedback, the fingerprint reader is gone, so the power button is just a power button. On the left side, you'll find 4 5 gigabit USB-A ports and a micro SD UHS 1 slot. Around the back is the DC in port plus a full function USB-C port offering 5 gigabit per second data, DisplayPort output, and power delivery, meaning you can power the PC via USB like from a hub or a monitor. 2 HDMI 2.0 ports and 1 DisplayPort round out video outputs. While you can physically connect 4 screens, the N150 supports only 3 simultaneous displays up to 4K at 60 Hz. The rear also holds dual gigabit Ethernet ports and a combined 3.5mm audio jack. All of this is housed in the same 140 by 140 by 45mm chassis. And here's possibly the best improvement. At filming, the Pro Plus is priced at just $159 US, a $50 drop from the original model launch price, despite some hardware upgrades. What I was most eager to see was which Linux operating system DreamQuest chose, and once I got the PC connected to peripherals and powered on, I encountered something I truly didn't expect. Out of the multitudes of distros DreamQuest could have chosen, they made the bold move of developing their own DreamQuest OS version 1.0. I was greeted by a setup wizard that appears to be a simplified version of Calamares. System configuration was super simple: select your language and keyboard, connect to Wi-Fi, pick your time zone, and create a user account. I connected to the 5 GHz band on my Xfinity Wi-Fi 6E access point, which is one of those routers that Realtek and MediaTek Wi-Fi cards are notoriously sketchy with under Linux. Surprisingly, I didn't run into any issues during setup, but we'll see a common Realtek related problem a bit later. Once installation kicked off, I spotted the first major clue. It's running KDE Neon with the Plasma desktop environment. KDE Plasma now fully integrates the Wayland compositor, which resolves many of the multi-display and variable refresh rate issues I demonstrated back in the original video, so that's a bonus. Once setup finished, I landed on a standard SDDM login screen, and logging in brought me to my favorite desktop environment for Linux on a desktop PC, Plasma. Now, there are a lot of opinions on which desktop environments is best for new users transitioning from Windows. Cinnamon is probably the most commonly recommended because it's the closest to a traditional Windows layout out of the box, but it's fairly static and limited in customization. KDE Plasma, on the other hand, not only looks familiar right away, but is also extremely customizable. It's a desktop environment that grows with the user, giving complete control over the interface and user experience. In DreamQuest OS, we see some light customizations to the default Neon layout. The application menu is on the left. Next to it is the virtual desktop selector. Docked applications are centered on the panel, and on the right is the system tray with the Plasma control hub, plus the clock and date pushed to the far right. Opening the system information panel showed we're running the latest version of KDE Plasma, which is expected as that's the whole point of Neon, and using the generic upstream Linux kernel version 6.11. It's not bleeding edge, but it's modern enough to fully support the hardware in this mini PC, and I'm pretty sure it's the same hardware enablement kernel used by Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, which KDE Neon is based on. Opening a terminal, I found another customization. DreamQuest OS defaults to ZSH instead of Bash, using OhmyZSH framework. While ZSH or Z shell is often considered an advanced shell, it's actually a great option for beginners thanks to features like syntax highlighting, auto suggestions, and smarter tab completion. Like KDE, it's something a new Linux user can grow with. Pulling up the OS release info confirmed this is in fact a rebranded version of KDE Neon. The ID field says Neon, and as expected, it's based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS Noble Numbat. Since it's built on Ubuntu, it uses the apt package manager, so you can install applications directly from the Ubuntu and Debian repositories. And for those not yet comfortable with the terminal, KDE includes Discover, the graphical software center for installing and managing software and updating the system. KDE Neon leaves Ubuntu's proprietary Snap package manager intact, but also installs Flatpak and adds the FlatHub repository. So now within Discover, you can install applications using apt, Snap, or Flatpak. A quick check shows that no Snap or Flatpak apps come pre-installed, meaning everything, at least out of the box, is from the standard Ubuntu apt repos. That gives you maximum system stability and native OS integration, which is a good thing for new users. For your core apps, stick with apt. For newer versions of GUI heavy software like OBS, Blender, or GIMP, I'd recommend Flatpak, and for Snap, use it only if there's no other option. As for what else comes pre-installed, let's look at the apps. The OS isn't bloated. We get the standard KDE apps, Arc, a file archiving tool, Dolphin, the file explorer, Elisa, the music player, Firefox as the web browser, GwenView for images, Comoso for webcam access, Kate, the advanced text editor, and the full LibreOffice productivity suite, which is typically bundled with Ubuntu, though I don't believe Neon includes it by default. You also get a few more KDE utilities like Ocular for PDFs, Spectacle for screenshots, and VLC for media playback. Just the essentials, nothing excessive. Looking at HTOP with a few user processes running, the system was using about 1.6 gigabytes of RAM with 77 tasks running, which is pretty lightweight and typical for KDE Neon. While Plasma can get heavier with animations and widgets, DreamQuest kept it pretty much lean out of the box. Aside from a few branded wallpapers and a custom light and dark theme, this is basically stock KDE Neon. So why rebrand the OS? Well, according to DreamQuest, it's about building brand recognition and offering a consistent user experience while also incorporating community feedback, although aside from switching to Z Shell, I don't see much of that. Realistically, I think the reason is more practical. While Linux itself is open source and covered under various free software licenses, the distro names and logos are trademarked. That means DreamQuest could technically pre-install Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or Zorin OS, but they wouldn't legally be allowed to use those names or logos in their marketing, packaging, documentation, or even boot screens without a trademark license. And in some cases, like with Linux Mint or KDE Neon, the developers have explicitly said they don't typically grant those licenses unless you're a major OEM or working on something non-commercial. So while DreamQuest could ship a system with Neon pre-installed, they couldn't advertise it that way or show the Neon logo on boot. By rebranding it as DreamQuest OS, they sidestepped that issue while still delivering a familiar Linux experience. Honestly, though, that's the only reason that makes sense, because as it stands, this is a pretty lazy rebrand. It offers no real user-facing benefits or meaningful customizations to better integrate the hardware. So let's talk about the hardware. I think the overwhelming majority of commenters on my original video agreed for the best compatibility and stability with Linux, DreamQuest really should have gone with an Intel AX series Wi-Fi adapter. And while they did upgrade from Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 4 to Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2, they still chose a Realtek card, specifically the RTL 8851BE. To be fair, this card is better supported under Linux than previous Realtek models, and the driver is incorporated into the kernel, but that doesn't mean the problems are gone. One of the biggest ongoing issues with this card is power management instability, and sure enough, I ran into that right away. The module was extremely slow to wake from power saving mode, resulting in dropped connections and generally unreliable. Thankfully, this is easily fixed by disabling network power savings, and honestly, since this is a desktop, there's no downside to just blacklisting all PCIe power saving kernel features entirely. But even with that sorted, these Realtek cards are still low quality hardware. Connecting to Wi-Fi on startup takes forever. Connecting a Bluetooth device like a speaker or headset often causes Wi-Fi lag, and throughput on 5 GHz networks is hit or miss at best. DreamQuest really needs to be ready for an uptick in Wi-Fi related support tickets. And that brings me to the second major issue, customer support. Ubuntu, as an OEM partner, provides licensing and support options to hardware manufacturers who build commercial products around their distros. That includes access to Canonical's infrastructure for handling OS-related problems. But by launching this PC with DreamQuest OS based on KDE Neon instead of something like official Ubuntu, DreamQuest is now solely responsible for all technical support. And personally, I wasn't sure if they were ready for that. To test it, I posed as a customer who purchased the Pro Plus on Amazon, which, to be clear, is exactly where this unit came from, and submitted a support ticket asking how to get an Elgato Stream Deck Mini working under their OS. To my surprise, I actually received a reasonably helpful reply just 2 days later. I'll put both my message and their full response on the screen. Feel free to pause and read through it, but here's the takeaway. Experienced Linux users will recognize that their solution is potentially effective if the device is detected and Stream Deck UI installs and runs properly. Then yes, this approach can enable basic functionality. However, Implementing it requires moderate Linux knowledge. Less experienced users may still need handholding to fix device permissions, installing missing Python packages. There are several missing, especially those related to USB device handling and configuring UDEV rules correctly. That's a lot to expect from someone new to Linux. That said, I'll give DreamQuest credit. This was a nuanced support question, and they responded more quickly and thoroughly than I expected. So while I had concerns about whether they had a Linux literate support team ready to help, this experience does ease those fears somewhat, because if the customer support fails, this product won't just fail, it'll actively push users away from Linux, and that's opposite of the goal. Another problem tied to rebranding the OS is the legal obligation that comes with using open source software. By modifying and redistributing a Linux-based operating system, especially one built on Ubuntu, which includes components governed by the GNU General Public License, or GPL, and other open source licenses, DreamQuest is required to publicly release the source code for the modified OS. As far as I can tell, they haven't done that yet. I brought this to their attention, and they assured me they'll be addressing it as soon as possible. Now, I also ran some baseline performance benchmarks on this mini PC, and that's where I ran into the next issue. Despite the CPU upgrade to the refreshed N150, in Geekbench 6, the new DreamQuest Pro Plus actually scored over 17% lower in multi-core performance compared to the older N100 model. I ran the test multiple times, tweaking power profiles and adjusting UEFI settings. I even installed vanilla KDE Neon on the N100 model and ran it again there, but this was the best multi-core score I could get from the N150. I believe the culprit is cooling. DreamQuest has clearly tuned down the fan profile in this updated model. It runs noticeably quieter than the original, but that comes at the cost of sustained performance. It's not that the CPU is thermal throttling, rather that the quiet cooling setup limits how often and how long the CPU can boost during extended multi-core workloads. This would explain the higher single-core scores yet lower multi-core. It's a trade-off that most everyday users, and especially the target audience for this PC, will probably be okay with, since the N100 version can get fairly loud under load. That said, providing UEFI access to fan curve settings would be ideal. Regardless of the hardware tier, PC enthusiasts want the option to squeeze out every bit of performance, and that's currently not possible here. For those more performance-focused users, I also ran my full suite of productivity and development benchmarks, and as with all my Linux reviews, you'll find links to the complete results in the description below. At the end of the day, DreamQuest asked me for a fair and honest review, and that's exactly what I'm giving them. I genuinely think the concept of an off-the-shelf, super affordable mini PC with a Linux operating system pre-installed and configured is a fantastic idea. It's the kind of product that could introduce free and open source software to Linux curious users in a really accessible way, and I do believe DreamQuest is generally trying to succeed with this system. I also understand the need to create a branded operating system due to licensing restrictions, but the reality is most users won't understand that. To them, this is going to look like a lazy rebrand. Worse, it puts DreamQuest in a position where they're fully responsible for customer support, and I'm afraid that might become overwhelming. Now, I also appreciate that DreamQuest reached out to me and others in the Linux community for feedback during development, and to their credit, the hardware is technically compatible out of the box with the OS they ship, but I think they missed the mark on the Wi-Fi adapter. Literally any of the Intel AX adapters would have provided seamless integration and reliable performance on Linux. I'll criticize Intel when it's deserved, but in this case, they are the gold standard for Linux driver support. They have dedicated teams contributing directly to the kernel and other core open source projects, and honestly, I think every single Intel-based mini PC I've ever reviewed has shipped with an Intel Wi-Fi card, so the decision to go with Realtek here is baffling. Releasing a newer model that performs worse than the previous version is also a bad look, even if the quieter operation is a plus. Now, there are better Linux first options out there with dedicated support. Absolutely, companies like System76, Tuxedo Computers, and Think Penguin build excellent Linux machines, but those are significantly higher tier products with a much higher price tag. At under $200, this might be the best entry-level option for someone who doesn't want to invest a lot of time or money into getting a mini PC up and running with Linux. Just something simple to start exploring the world of open source software. Meanwhile, more advanced users who can troubleshoot their own issues is already capable of picking out their own mini PC and installing Linux themselves. And for those users, there are simply better options at the same price point, like the Beelink EQ14, which comes with the same N150 CPU, the same RAM and storage, but features an Intel Wi-Fi adapter and dual 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports. So, welcome to the open source community, DreamQuest. You've still got some work to do, but we're glad you're here. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to see more honest Linux hardware reviews, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.